this is the documentation here for Docker, and this is the documentation for Podman. And as a solution architect, you'll need to get really comfortable with documentation, because understanding the documentation of what those tools can do is critically important, so that the team get the best from those tools. So that is a factor that as an architect you will be required to read through documentation and understand it to a certain point, and try to play with these tools. Um, and that's in the last session we spoke about, playground environment. And this is a type of tool that you could play in your playground environment, where you wouldn't actually break anything until you're ready to have a secure version. So let's imagine that you've gone through the setup here, and you've opened up your desktop here for your Docker desktop, and I'm going to open up my Podman desktop. And again, these are two tools that are installed onto my Mac right now, obviously. Um, but you can see they're quite similar. They've both got containers, which is the small piece of application that we're going to be using. They've got pods, they've got volumes. They generally work the same, which is great. There's fundamentally, the Podman uses a VM, but fundamentally you can transfer those skills from Docker desktop over to Podman desktop. So that's really, really great news for us, because even if you learn one of these, you would actually technically be learning two. So that's a huge benefit. So what I want to do is I want to bring you over to our channel for one moment, and I want to show you, this is Cloud Solutions Architect.eu, that channel. And if you look at it over here, you can sort of see there's a GitHub repository here, link here. And this is that GitHub repository here. And what we do is, for every session that we're going to create in this series, we're going to put a new set of notes here. And these notes will be continually updated. You can see that, that there's updates going on. But I want to go into the Docker and Podman, because this is session 3 of our notes here. And I want to look down, and you can sort of see in these notes here, there's basic notes on how to install them. But again, refer back to your Docker desktop and your Podman notes on how to really install and how to make sure that everything's working. But really, I kind of come down here, and in your Podman, you can basically sort of see what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up a new command prompt, right? So a command prompt, every Windows application, Mac application, Linux application, or server will all have a command prompt that you can open and you can use, And generally these tools, they provide an interface that we kind of saw, through the actual dashboard itself, but they also provide a command line. So that basically allows us, some people prefer, to basically be using the dashboard like here, and some people prefer to be using the command line. Personally, I prefer to be using the command line. It's just easier for automation, and sometimes it's, it provides you a bit more detail about certain aspects of the actual tool itself. But whichever way you do it, what I've done here is I've put notes in here about how to, for example, start your machine, which is an actual VM machine for Podman here. So what I'd like to kind of do here is quickly kind of demo. If I was kind of, starting off here with Podman machine start, and this is again on my local machine, you can sort of see it can't restart it because it's already started and running. So that's very good. So that is good. I'm going to skip by here, but I'm going to sort of say here that you have some basic tools and some basic commands here. Okay, so what I can kind of do is I can sort of say Podman image list, and right now this is an image that I built. This is an image that I actually built yesterday in preparation for this video, and you can sort of see that there's an image name and there's a tag, and really this is an actual container. So this basically sort of says to me, my test image is my container, and my tag. Now this could be, any version, could be latest version, which some people use. It could also be, a specific version that some people will use when they get into providing these to the teams. So let's just sort of say that we sort of say Podman container list here. Now, right now, I don't have any containers running. So in my Podman machine, I have no containers running, but I do have an image, which basically means that somebody built out this image yesterday. Now, as we learn through, you know, this series, I mean, what we try to do is take you from the basics and up. So some people will be aware that, about kind of containers and images, but there will be some people that are not aware of them. So what I'd like to kind of do here is actually, I'd like to run a command here that basically will delete this image. So I'm basically just going to sort of say, find out the images, but remove them at the same time. So this is like a shortcut, right? So if I now go back into Podman image list, I can now see that I actually don't have any images here. So my images have been deleted off of my machine. Remember that this is my Mac, right? This is not running somewhere, in a Kubernetes environment on a dev or stage or production environment. This is an image on my Mac. So what I'm trying to do here is sort of say, Podman, allow me to create an image that I can locally test. Okay, so let's sort of see if I have any networks available here. Now, this is something a little bit more advanced, in Docker and Podman. And I do actually have a network, and this is a bridge network. And again, we'll get into the networking side of the series in a different session. But what it basically just allows you to do is kind of separate out onto a separate network all of the Podman commands that I'm going to run. That's the simple way to do it. And to think about it, all I'm essentially doing is sort of saying, give me, a little test network and run my image on that test network. That's what I want to kind of do. And that just kind of keeps, my workings away from anything that may interfere with my Mac. But right now, let's sort of say I've created a Docker file here. So for Docker and Podman, you basically have to have a Docker file. Now you can do this without a Docker file, but best practice from the Docker desktop does suggest that you would actually have a Docker file. And Docker file, once you learn how to do one Docker file, it's very easy to actually implement many Docker files. So this is just one sample that I took from the Docker desktop notes. And it's just one sample that basically says, from Nginx. So this is basically saying to me in my Docker file, use my Nginx and have a static directory. Now, right now, I do not have anything that's running in my static directory. I don't have anything there. So I did create a static directory here, but what I just want to kind of do is run this image here. So this is the Podman. Don't forget, we want to use the Podman. So I want to kind of go back here. I'm going to close this off for a second, and we'll look at Docker files in a separate. But right now, the Docker file basically just says off my screen here. So I'm basically just going to go back, and I'm just going to paste in this this Podman build of this image. So I'm sort of saying, for the output, I want my test image, and I want the version 1. And I want to use the Docker file that I just created. So I'm going to build that. And this basically, this period here, there's a start, basically says, look in the current folder, which is my downloads folder right now. And I will take I know this kind of Podman is a little bit kind of slower than Docker. But technically, if you were going to build, a Docker image here, the same idea would apply. You would have a file with the commands or the instructions to Docker. So you could sort of say, please allow me to use Nginx or Apache. And then in the file permissions, please allow me to do, X, Y, and Z. Please allow me to download, or please allow me to modify. Because anything that you can technically do um, in your command line, which is this section here, you can technically do inside of the Docker file. You know, so there is multiple ways around it, and people get really really good at writing their Docker files and maintaining the Docker files, and Docker files can get very big. But essentially, what we're trying to do here is say, just use a simple Docker file for the moment, build out my test image here, give it a version number of 1.0, and allow it to create an image. And that image or that container or that image can be used then later on, as part of an actual container. So just while that's building out, you can think that you've basically got let's put this over here. You basically got, you know, this is going to be Docker or Podman. And you basically got in here, you've basically got a container. So this is going to be a container. What we're going to do here is duplicate this one. And we're going to sort of say that this is actually going to be your image on top. So you're going to have a Docker Podman image, which basically will be used as part of your container. And that's essentially what you're trying to do. You're trying to get this container running. And this is where Kubernetes comes in, where they can automate this and orchestrate the container side of things. But for now, you can think that you have an image, and it could be any image. If you simply go to like Nginx images, you can go to the official Nginx, which is a web server. You can sort of see that they have multiple images already built and available. So you can kind of reference any of these versions um, into your system, into your Docker file, and um, it will basically build out your correct image of Nginx into from your Docker file. So you can sort of see here that we have some steps that's been successfully created. And you can see here that, successfully tagged localhost. And, that's just because I'm running on Mac with the image name and with the version. So if I do my Podman image list again, I can see that 44 seconds ago, I created a new image with a tag. It has an image ID. It has a size. So in Docker and Podman, I mean, we're always, concerned about when you actually have an image that's going to be moved around. Don't forget, this image would be technically used with multiple images. We're always concerned about the size, just making sure that the size doesn't balloon up to something, that takes, a huge amount of space, because when it comes to the Kubernetes of what we'll see, you have to move these containers around. So just be kind of aware of that. But let's kind of go back here. So all the next command would actually basically do is it would run my my image on my network on a specific port. Now, something that I noticed yesterday was that Podman by default doesn't come with privileged ports, and privileged ports I've put down some notes about privileged ports. That basically, if you were to run port 80, you were going to try and use port 80, because as you may or may not be aware that all computers and all applications use ports, and ports are essentially the mechanism on the network that basically says, I can connect to an application on a specific port. But for now, what I'd like to sort of do is, if I was to run this right now, it would actually fail, because Podman on my own Mac, it doesn't have the permissions to allow it to run on port 80. So because port 80 is a privileged port. So what I actually have to do is I have to just update this here to be a specific port. So what I'm going to do now is going to sort of say, well, this is the port that my browser is going to use, and this is the port that the internal image, which we know is Nginx, is going to use. And that's the only kind of difference that I'm going to make here, rather than exposing my port 80 ports. And always be careful especially if you're working for large corporations, that you're aware of ports, um, and the challenges around ports, and the firewall teams, and you know, making sure that you don't expose ports that you shouldn't be using. But just as this little test here in this little demo, what I've just done is I've sort of said to, Podman, you can actually use 8080, port 8080, and you can find out all of the list of ports. But you can sort of say, I'm going to use 8080, and internally to the Podman image, I'm going to use port 80 internally. So this is the container internally. This is the web browser, because if we go back to our little diagram here, this will be your web browser, and essentially what your web browser and container are going to do are going to run. So this container is basically going to run on your web browser, which it basically has your image. So we can kind of put that like, image, and this is going to be Nginx. So this is an Nginx image, has a specific tag, the container we've built, and now we've just given the instruction of the web browser. So please, create this new container for me, please. And if I do Podman container list, I can now sort of see that the status is it's up about 1 minute, and this is, the internal generic application IP. So we won't worry about that today, but we have a Pacific port, TCP, part of the networking protocols we won't worry about. But essentially, we have a new name for our container as well, and we have the image that's listed. Now, what does that mean? So I see it's up, about a minute. So that essentially means that my container, which is this one, is running somewhere. So where is it running? So if I kind of go back to my notes here, you can see that my container is actually going to be running in my browser. So if I go in here, and you can see that this container, I'm going to just minimize this a little bit. You can see that this container called testing Podman, which has an ID to Podman of this, is actually running on port 8080. And that's what we specified we should be using here. Okay. Now you can see, this Nginx image doesn't do anything because I haven't, put any files into the Nginx image. But you could imagine that this is an Nginx image that's, required to do something on your website. Let's sort of say, I have a new website here and I want to do something in Nginx, and I pick that Nginx is the correct web server for me. Right now, we know that the Nginx is running locally on my machine. But technically, you could upload this image to your company repository and allow them to use the same image. So if I was to modify this image and, build a full website into the image and copy all of the files into the image, and I could see this beautiful, website, or could see this application, or whatever the job of this container is to do, it would be a benefit, because then multiple teams could reuse that same image, and there's also where we get into vulnerability scanning of this image, and making sure that the security protocols around these images and everything. But that would be for another day. But for now, we can see that our Nginx image is running successfully. Now, what I want to do is just go back to my session 3 for a moment, because I want to kind of show you these kind of quick cleanup steps, because I don't want to keep this container running, because remember, this container is now taking a port on my Mac, okay, and I may need that port for something else. So if I look at the kind of quick cleanup, I can sort of say container list, so I know I have a container. What I want to do now is actually stop that container. So this is the actual container ID, and this is the short version of this longer version here. So I can just take that, I can paste that, and I can just sort of say, yes, please stop that, right? And then what I want to do here is I want to go back to my Nginx, and what's going to happen here is it's going to be gone, right? So you see the site can't be reached anymore, it's gone. Please check your firewall settings, but I know it's just come down because I've just stopped that container. Now I still have pod. Podman image list. Now I still have the image. So if I really wanted to, I could actually go back in and restart the container and the website would come back up. And this is where, tools of Kubernetes type tools come into play. But, you can sort of see the benefits here of having this little image here and creating a container from it, because you could have, 10 containers running all at the same time, running the same image. And if one of those containers stops, the other nine will take the traffic in the server. So I'm just going to load something here very quickly, and I'm just going to remove that image. Again, I'm just going to clean that up. So now if I do podman image list, sorry, I didn't remove. Let me just go back up here. I need to just delete. I may have just put that. Yes, sorry, I put the wrong command. I'll update that now. So basically, I want to kind of just delete that image. So you can see now podman image list. You can sort of see now I don't have any image, but we could put this image onto somewhere. We could put the container onto somewhere. If we go back to our Lucid, I'm using the Lucid chart here just to kind of explain these kind of quickly. You can see that we basically get our podman, we get our image, we get a container, we get a web browser. And this all kind of fits together to start looking at and start considering how we could break up these big monolithic type of applications into smaller microservices. Because remember, this could grow very, very quickly, and this is where the security teams will be making sure that this port to this, if this container, if there was a second container over to another container, that they're communicating on the correct channels and everything. But for now, this is just a really, really simple explanation of between Docker and Podman. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.